Disclaimers. 1. The content shared in this podcast is strictly for informational purposes and should not be construed as financial or legal advice. 2. The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests are solely their own and do not represent the views of their employers or affiliated organizations. 3. None of the projects or companies discussed should be considered as endorsements or recommendations. 4. While efforts are made to ensure accuracy, the information provided may not always be up to date or entirely reliable. It is advisable to conduct independent research and seek professional guidance before making any financial or legal decisions. 5. The hosts and guests of this podcast shall not be held liable for any consequences or actions resulting from the use of the information provided. 6. All content, including text, graphics, and audio, is protected by copyright laws. Unauthorized reproduction or distribution is strictly prohibited. 7. Any discussions on sensitive topics aim to foster inclusivity and respectful dialogue, but differing opinions should be expected and not attributed to the podcast creators or sponsors. 8. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree to these disclaimers, and you are responsible for your own interpretation and application of the information presented.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Intersection4 podcast. You have the usual Hamiz and Brendon on the call, but we're very excited to also have Lindsey on the call. Lindsey specializes in helping startups and the investors that invest in startups with all of their legal and business advice. As an attorney, she really sits in between, being the legal advisor, but also having a close ear to what's happening out in the real world in these transactions. I have interacted with Lindsey a few times, have learned a lot from her, and so wanted to bring her on to tackle some of the topics that we have today. So thank you, Lindsey, for being on the show with us, and Brendon, thank you as always.
Lindsey.
Thanks for having me. Hi, guys. Nice
course.
to meet you and see you in person. Hi, everyone out there in the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we'll kick off with is what Lindsey is seeing in the market. She has more than 600, different startups and different clients that she's working with. So she really gets to see, breadth of deals. She has partners all the way from Seattle to San Francisco, San Diego, in all types of different industries and verticals. So really has a breadth of experience and knowledge as the deals come through. So, Lindsey, tell us what you're seeing, and Brendon and I have a bunch of questions for you. So we'll jump in and ask you some of those.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsey Mignano. As Hamiz mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of a women-owned corporate law firm headquartered in San Francisco, but with offices in Seattle and San Diego. So our particular practice area is serving the early stage technology market and then investors who are possibly micro funds that invest in early stage. So everyone always asks, what is early stage? And that can change. So I'm across jurisdictions, across countries. So I'm just going to use hard dollars. In San Francisco, I would call a pre-seed angel round anything about 500,000 in the bank raised, usually via safe note or convertible note with an emphasis on Y Combinator, post-money safe note being the belle du jour. And then I would say a seed round would normally go anywhere from 1 to 5 million. Now, in the past, we've seen seed rounds switch from note rounds to priced rounds right around the 2 or 3 million mark. But generally speaking, 1 to 5 million, a healthy seed in the Bay Area. And I would say a Series A in the Bay Area before 2022 used to start at 10 million. And that would, and I say start at 10 million and go all the way up to maybe 20 or 30, depending on the type of vertical of the client. And I would say, generally speaking, even in some verticals like life sciences or biotech, you would see clients raising up to 10 million on a safe, right? Especially in industries that require quite a lot of upfront cash for the first round. So I'm thinking specifically biotech, life sciences, climate tech, anything that requires a lot of hardware engineering, as opposed to like just traditional enterprise software, SaaS or PaaS. My particular focus is usually enterprise SaaS or PaaS. And that's because, this is a Bay Area market, so we see quite a lot of investment going into those particular industries. The Bay Area still reigns the day with 16.4, 16.5 billion deployed this past year, even in a down market. The second up is New York at 5.4. So we still are in the Bay Area seeing quite a heavy difference in deployment of capital. Most of our companies are Bay Area based. If we open locations in different jurisdictions, such as Seattle or San Diego, they may raise their first few rounds there, their pre-seed, their seed 1, seed 2, but they usually do come to the Bay Area for some proportion of Series A or Series B. And so that makes us a really nice landing hotspot and have that headquartered here. We are particularly networked with, I say, VCs who invest in pre-seed, seed, or Series A in the Bay Area. Nowadays, every VC is location agnostic, so that's really great. And then on my free time, when I do have free time, I formed a venture fund of funds that currently invested in a $400 million AI enterprise venture fund, as well as a syndicate fund that invests in real estate properties, just to get my money out of law into other things. So experience both from a lawyer perspective, but also as a business person who owns my own firm and owns my own 2 funds. I'm very, very interested in this area, just personally and professionally. I'm so happy to be here. I would say if you want to talk market stats, I'm happy to. I don't have the numbers right in front of me. I can give you the general gist of
Sure.
like what's going on in the market.
Sure. Well, I actually didn't know that. So that's interesting information on the fund side. So actually, let's elaborate on that. So tell us more of why particularly you picked this $400 billion AI fund. Like, what was the thesis?
Well, they are a $400 million enterprise software SaaS PaaS AI fund going and deploying to Series B or Series C companies. And I can't reveal the name of the fund right now because they're still in fundraising mode. They haven't become public. I will say that we had invested about $320,000 into their fund. And that's just me and my girlfriends. We have no institutional investors. And the reason why I chose that area is, as you may know, enterprise SaaS is really hot in the Bay Area, but AI is just killing it these days. We have had clients, maybe 3 to 5 new clients a week, who have come in and pitched some sort of AI enterprise software with an emphasis on generative AI. Now, what's really, I think, interesting about AI is that there's so many different ways that they can make that quite profitable very easily, but there's a lot of defensibility issues. So our firm, from an investment perspective, defensibility issues are like, does this company really own this IP? Is it novel and unique? Is it investable? From a legal issue that we're seeing quite a bit is we're spending quite a bit in the privacy space. So we have a couple of 3 actually privacy lawyers who are working pretty exclusively with enterprise AI companies with regard to their privacy policies and their white papers and their security policies and procedures. And that's because it does present a host of novel issues there as well. So both from an investment perspective, very interesting, both from a legal perspective, also kind of the wild, wild west, right? And lawyers love that stickiness of, could this be something that changes the way we do business forever, and what are the legal risks associated with it? I think defensibility from a venture perspective is the most interesting thing to see with a lot of the companies that are coming to us for counsel on that issue, as to whether or not they really do own the IP, especially when they are using ChatGPT in some function as a part of their stack, right? So really interesting IP issues all around. But it's a very hot area. So the reason why I invested in that fund is because these are experienced VCs, but also because they're investing in a hot area that, at least at the early stage, we're seeing quite a lot of activity. It feels very blockchain of 2017, 2018. And I think what the strategy may be, because of the rush to market on all of these, is I think there are a lot of early stage VCs that are throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what's going to stick. We're having clients who come with a term sheet without even having incorporated a company. And this is not no joke money. This is like 2 to 3 million on a safe note, with one reputable firm leading. And so I think we're seeing a lot of that. VCs, again, from a investment perspective, throwing spaghetti at a wall, hoping that one of them hits. And I think we've seen a lot that use of that philosophy before in other industries. And whether or not that's good or bad, I do think that we're seeing quite a bit of it here in San Francisco. In terms of other industries, though, I think I would say, aside from enterprise SaaS PaaS in the AI space, we are still quite seeing a bunch of relative like fintech adjacent or fintech, less of retail tech doing well, honestly, in this economy. A good proportion of ARXR. That's something that I think California startups are still very hot on. And in terms of companies that we don't necessarily, or I don't necessarily advise quite a bit, I do still think that the market is hot for life sciences, biotech, med tech, and climate tech. All of those are companies that may not need VC financing right away because they usually rely on grants to get them to where they need to be before they get their first round. And so those companies are still doing pretty well, especially with grants being not VC money. And I would say my law partner, Tila in San Diego, has a better pulse on that particular market with life sciences, biotech than I do, just because I'm here in the Bay Area and those are not necessarily my clients. But I would say they're doing statistically pretty well, and anecdotally we've seen them do pretty well as well, especially in this market, which is not the greatest for startups right now.
Yeah.
That's right.
I had a question. Yeah. So when you're looking at companies, we'd love to hear from your perspective where you think the moat is. We heard one story from a few folks probably 6 months ago. It changed recently, probably 3 months ago. And we're hearing from our side a different story of what defensibility means or what a moat could be for these B2B enterprise AI companies. And I would also love to hear what you think other investors believe this moat is, and then yours specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are actually doing a panel with ChatGPT, Vouch Insurance, and Wells Fargo Technology Banking on generative AI and privacy related issues in October if you're in San Francisco. So, of course, our firm is helping to host that. I would think one of the things that comes up quite a bit is the use of generative AI from other platforms in building the platform at issue, and whether or not that, let's just use the easiest example, you use ChatGPT to develop code. Who did ChatGPT get that code from? Who owns it? If ChatGPT guarantees you that you own the output, is that really true? Because someone had to have created that in order for it to pop up on their platform, which you then use on your platform. So some of the questions that we've received recently is, what if we decide we're going to cut some developers and use ChatGPT to generate our code? And is that something that we can say we own that IP? That IP is novel. And the question is, well, really, if ChatGPT is sourcing this from sources, who created it, and is that assignment valid? And will investors invest in the company? And we recognize that you're going to use stacks, and they're going to contain different technologies, and not every single thing is going to be owned by you. I think people understand that, but it's a matter of degree, right? So if you build your whole platform on other generative AI technologies where there's questions about ownership of IP, I think there are some issues about whether or not that will get funded. And so what we're telling our clients is this is not a black and white. This is a shades of gray. And to be as cautious as possible with using generative AI technologies in their stack when it comes to their IP portfolio, just because we want to preserve the opportunity for venture financing. And during due diligence, if there is a question about whether that IP actually belongs to that company, then this is a make or break deal kind of situation, right? And there's a number of VCs who have spoken very openly about defensibility with using, ChatGPT I'm saying ChatGPT, but I really mean generative AI in stacks accordingly. So it's a really interesting investment proposition that has legal implications and research in addition to the privacy issues, right? So it's again, really cool industry. I think we have a lot to say about it. But there are also other industries that are doing well in the Bay Area. So if there's anyone on the line who wants to hear more about those, I can always weigh in as well.
One follow-on for that before I kick it over to Hamiz. When you think about taking board seats, does this come up in conversation when we think of like a venture capital saying, we could try to push for a board seat at this stage, but given the legal ramifications, maybe we wait, until the next round, and we're happy to do the safes. Has that come up?
Right. So we normally have only seen board seats at Series A historically. So a Series A round in the Bay Area would be normally 10 million, and we would see a board seat given at that point to the lead investor. We normally do not see board seats for anything less than that. But that's a very Bay Area specific market. Now, when we have clients who raise from the MENA region or Asia or India, there are different expectations around board seats. But here in Silicon Valley, I would say board seat at Series A is pretty much the go. We would never see necessarily something below that. Now, what's really interesting about this economy is that it's really an investor's market. You're going to see less money deployed, less deal count, and you're going to see more stringent, provisions that are actually not novel. They're provisions that favor investors And they come into play in environments like this when the investors are sitting on a mountain of cash, but haven't deployed as quickly. And right now we're seeing our clients take longer to raise anecdotally, and the stats will prove it. So if you look at NVCA pitch book or Carta, you'll see that delayed time frame, almost 2 years between A and B. And we're seeing when the money does hit the door, we're seeing a lot less, but being asked as a startup to do a lot more with it. So really strong attention if you're doing enterprise SaaS or PaaS to like founder-led sales, efficiency economics, really extending that legal runway or accounting runway or sales runway or development runway, so as to get as much as possible with as little as possible. This is no longer burn at all costs. So those kinds of metrics are going to be more important, I would say, when they're looking at you than whether or not you're going to give them a board seat. Do I anticipate that investors might ask for it for less money and at an earlier stage? It is their economy right now. But we have advised clients that in a normal healthy economy, you would see it at A and not before then.
Yeah, maybe regardless of the company's success or the stage they're at, has anyone passed on a board seat due to the expectation that they're legally liable
No,
to the company if there's ramifications from these technologies that come through?
I haven't seen that. Obviously, directors and officers insurance is something that's purchased at Series A, which shields directors and officers from liability in relation to their duties, their fiduciary duties that they have to the company. So to the extent there's a concern about liability, that's usually covered by D&O. So they wouldn't pass on that basis. I think what they would pass on is the investment itself, right? You wouldn't even get to the point of having a conversation about whether to put that investor on the board. If the technology or the IP is not defensible, they wouldn't even invest in your company. They wouldn't even get past due diligence.
Makes sense.
So we're talking about the defensibility of, if somebody is replacing some of their engineering talent or engineering hours with ChatGPT or any other generative AI tool out there, what about the defensibility if you're built on top of the technology that other companies are providing? Right. So like how defensible, how valuable is your technology if it's just a wrapper? Right. And it's just a interface to the deeper technology that has been built by other companies. So how do you see that? Actually, this question for both of you. But first, I want to hear what Lindsey thinks about that, and then obviously the founder who is utilizing some of these things. I want to hear what he has to say about it.
Yeah, I think this is shades of gray again, not yes or no, right? It's how much of your stack is going to be with these technologies, and what percentage is somewhat questionable. Again, we're seeing a really rush to market with a lot of early stage VCs funding ideas on a napkin when it comes to the AI enterprise space, knowing that maybe the whole stack is not ironclad, and that's okay. That companies have gotten funded without an ironclad stack. Like they recognize that you're going to use some things and build upon some things to make your products. I think at the end of the day, it's really like, what is the IP and how much of it do you really own? And are they comfortable with taking that risk, right? In terms of our advice as counsel, we have told most of our clients to be real careful when it comes to using generative technologies as to the code, as to the IP, as to things where that is the core crux and value proposition of their company, right? That's why they get funded. And so, understanding, this is a shades of gray situation. We try to keep the focus on what are you selling to VCs, and do you own that? That's essentially the TLDR layman's question to answer, is as long as you own the main crux. If you have open source whatever on your stack, and you use that to put all the widgets together, and some of them are open source, and it makes this new proprietary thing, then we'll see if it flies, right? In this environment, I would say we have a lot of clients who have some open source in their stack, if not many, and who have some defensibility issues, who are getting funded. And again, in that same vein of VCs at the early stage throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing if it's going to stick, right? It's a frenzy right now in AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The example that comes to mind from my side is everyone talked about AWS for a number of years being like the platform that everyone was building off of. And then you have companies like Snowflake which are platform agnostic, and they're doing phenomenal on the very means of a wrapper around AWS, GCP, and Azure. I think that the argument is fair and valid until it's not. When that chasm is crossed, we don't know. I think month one, last October, November, it was definitely a lot of OpenAI wrappers. By probably 6 months ago, I saw some pretty great stuff, and now more recently, we see every company have a generative AI or OpenAI integration, and it accelerates some part of their business. They're using it to fundraise, to hire, but more broadly, it looks like there's some defensibility around other segments.
I think more importantly too, for these companies in this fundraising environment is really more of like the recurring revenue for enterprise SaaS or PaaS, right? So defensibility, as she's aside, aside from the issue of how much of your stack is actually yours, there is, I think, more attention paid to annual recurring revenue ARR at the seed stage. This is not burn at all cost, right? They're really looking for founder-led sales. And so I've heard VCs, I think January Ventures had said on a panel, which I think they do a lot of really early stage female-founded companies, and they're looking for like 0 to 1 at the seed stage, 0 to 1 million ARR, and then definitely right like the Series Seed A stage, and that can vary depending where you are, but we're looking for 2 to 3 million of ARR, and so really those partnerships that you get as a founder to deploy, especially if you're B2B to C, or even just regular B2B, I think become really important. And there's a balance between defensibility and profitability at that point, and whether you're a good business decision. So it's not exclusively on the defensibility end.
Yeah, I think there's, as an investor, right, I think there's some industries where intellectual property is the defense, right? And when I say that, I mean, medical, like medical research, and where patents are the value for the entire company, right? For really most businesses outside of that, the defensibility comes from your financials, actually. It comes from your market share. It doesn't necessarily come from your technology. So when I look at a business, you could have the most unique technology stack out there, but if you have a competitor that has more market share, that's growing that market share faster than you, then I'm far more interested in that competitor, because eventually they're going to figure out the technology, or they're going to purchase the technology from you or someone else. But breaking the market share and breaking into the financials that make that business sustainable, that's the piece that, to me personally as an investor, that's the defensibility of the business. And so it's only barring a few industries. Outside of that, patents, NDAs, like all of this stuff, and you might not like hearing this, Lindsey, like on the legal side, but for me, it's barring some of those industries. Like I don't look at these things as valuable unless you have the ability to sell that value to somebody, right? And you've sold that technology to somebody. So just having a great patent portfolio, like today, if you had an AI company with a massive patent portfolio, to me, it would be worth very little. But if you had another who was built on top of ChatGPT, it was just a wrapper, but had 30% market share in their category, I would be very interested in that.
Right. And
and growing.
I agree. But I think it has to go hand in hand, because you see if the IP does not really belong to that company, or if there's a lawsuit regarding the ownership of that IP, then all of a sudden, ARR or not, you could tank that company like that, right? So that's where the generative AI issue really intersects the IP issues that are currently ongoing and being litigated, if not litigated over and twice again, and the ownership of generative AI. Of that output is really interesting to look at, because that is tank the company type of litigation that you could end up in. And so not only for the founders themselves, but the company and the whole business proposition itself, right? So I think that's why it's so sexy right now about AI, to be so nerdy about it. It's a lot can dangle on a thread, and the law is always too clunky, and it never catches up quite at the same pace as technology. So this actually does really affect defensibility of the business and the ongoing concern of the business in a real way, which makes lawyers like me feel like this is a very important topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from a from a risk perspective, like, so as an investor, like, you have to put on the hat of upside and downside, right? And
Right.
so I think from a downside perspective, looking at the who owns that intellectual property is super important, right? Because like you said, it
Can
could make
tank
the
the company.
company worth zero,
Yeah.
right, overnight, if you have Microsoft suing you for stealing their IP. At the same time, to me, what gets me excited about the business is, like I said, their traction, their financials, their market share. That's what gets investors excited about a business. I can't tell you how many hundreds of startups I've met that I could definitively say had better technology than the company that I ended up investing in,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, it's almost never the best technology that wins, right? It's like, it's very rare to find hundreds of companies that have the best technology and they win. But the companies with the best distribution, they win all the time.
Absolutely.
And the right and the
Goes to that
best example of
ARR.
this is Facebook. Yeah, it's like Facebook,
ARR.
right? Everybody hates Facebook's application, right? It breaks, it's tough to use, but it doesn't matter. They always have had that, but they always had the distribution, right? And so there were hundreds of other social media platforms that tried to compete with Facebook. Better technology, better user experience, all of that. It doesn't matter because Facebook had the distribution. So I think from that perspective,
Distribution or switching costs because of network effects.
um, I think you could argue both ways. But the network effects are also distribution, right? Like, it's just that the network effects are so strong that distribution is now their core value, right? Like, and the technology has fallen to
For
the background,
yeah,
right? Like,
I think that's
people,
specific for that industry though. Like for
okay,
social media, the product isn't Facebook, the platform. Obviously,
yep,
that's a good
yep,
portion of it. But social media, the product is the connections on
the
it.
connections there,
Whereas like an enterprise B2B SaaS tool, there is a reason to switch if there's better technology
Oh yeah.
that's highly targeted to one person,
sure,
regardless of like the big incumbent who's like said, hey, we have better distribution. You could still win people over. I
sure.
think that's like the small difference between like these network effect based businesses.
Sure,
No,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah, maybe in some of these R&D focused stages of these technologies, maybe there hasn't nobody has a moat, right? And so today,
yeah,
nobody has that defensibility, right? But if it's something that is not as complex or as advanced as the startup feels, then of course the company would feel more comfortable with a Palantir or a
yeah.
Scale AI, right? Like, and even if they had an inferior version of what this startup was building, he would still
Totally.
be more comfortable with Scale AI,
Yeah,
especially at the enterprise scale. So I think
yeah.
that network effects, distribution, still matter. But I
Mm-hmm.
agree, like, when nobody has a moat, if you're in a market where there's nobody with distribution, of course, technology can make the difference. But if you have incumbents, they have you have quite a uphill battle to
Sure,
beat them
sure.
purely on technology. And so all I ask for my founders to do is balance the technology and the distribution, right?
Yeah,
And too many of them like love building technology, so they just think if we build it, they will come,
yeah.
and they
Maybe
won't come.
reset is like
Yeah.
be passionate about the product, not the technology. Like
Hmm.
I think we've seen time and time again. I don't know if Lindsay, you have an opinion on this, but it feels
So
like
many.
people are tied to the technology right now, not the products
Yeah.
being built. Lindsay, what do you think this is most similar to in your career from a period of time where this feels like we're in a similar one?
So what I at least on our level, we have a lot of founders who are technical founders, and then obviously, the best ones that get funded have a technical founder and the business guy who is ideally the person eyes on the prize, partnership, scaling. What are we cutting out of the process to make this widget better than what's
Hmm.
currently out there? And ideally you have both. What I find, I think that is the most annoying thing for me as a lawyer to these companies is the focus on the technical so much at the expense of the business, because I think you're very right. And I don't know what you're requiring for ARR on your end at your firm, but we're seeing a lot of really great products and founders that are very technical founders who cannot take their product to market in a meaningful way. And so you can have the best technology in the world, but you have no recurring revenue partnerships, and you can't scale, then it doesn't really matter, right? Because they have to go hand in hand. And then I guess the next annoying thing that I'm always a little annoyed with founders about is they create products in a space that they think is great, and it's very novel and it's great, but the market size is not big enough to really make this a venture financeable business, right? So there's two things at hand. So it can be a very good technical product, but even if you have people to buy it, so this is the opposite of the first problem where you have no one to buy it, but you have people to buy it, but the market size is so small that even if you took half of that, it's just still a small business. It's not really a venture financeable proposition. And so I think that's the issue with, like, when I find that I have founders that are either both technical or too technical, is the emphasis becomes on the perfect build out. And that's worth it on one hand. But this is not black and white game. This is shades of gray, right? You got to have a little bit of everything. And I think the ones that, are better have a pretty good, solid working product, but are also emphasizing how do we get that money in the door. As a business owner, like, that resonates a lot with me. So when I hear founders who are either not in tune with that or not prioritizing that from the get-go, especially in an economy like this, then we kind of have to have a conversation about whether this is just a hobby loss, or is this going to be a venture financeable business? What middleman are you cutting out of this process? How is this scalable? How much of the market are you taking? And why are you better than your competition? And I think that's what gets really frustrating as a lawyer who is not a startup founder, to have to broach these conversations with really technical back-end coders who have never had to answer essentially business questions about their business.
Lindsey, one quick follow-up. Why do you think then that they love technical founders?
I think
it feels almost counterintuitive, because we're like, oh, these technical founders, like, they don't get out there and sell. But then you almost meet any venture fund and they're like, there needs to be a founder that's technical.
I think it's because of cost, right? So in the Bay Area, if you're an engineer at a big tech company, you're bringing home at least $300, right? Like, at least maybe up to $500, depending on how senior you are. But whenever you are sitting down doing this and you're contributing that IP to the company owns that IP. There's no question about it, right? The cost of hiring and paying someone to do that dev for you is very expensive in America. And the fact that you may not then even own all of it, it could be subject to an agreement with that dev firm that says they give you an unlimited, revocable, royalty-free license, but not actual ownership. The reason why technical co-founders are key is because that person got shares in exchange for that IP. That's an IRS 351 tax-free transfer at an corporation, and the company owns that IP. It is rock solid investment. Versus when you outsource that, as somebody who sees a lot of companies with business founders but no technical co-founders, when you outsource that to development firms or the guy in Romania who may or may not ever pull through for you, then you have some questions about whether or not that's IP assignment is enforceable. Like, I've never litigated an IP issue in Romania, but what if Romanian courts don't uphold it and this guy just creates a competing company? And under the laws of Romania, that's completely possible. That's a hard proposition if I'm going to give you $10 million of my money, right? I want that solid IP ownership. So that's why I think they insist on it. From a cost perspective, it makes sense.
What would you think is, like, maybe even saying, hey, there's a business founder, great storyteller, and they hire all these, like, US-based, maybe technical folks. They're not co-founders, though. Would you invest in that? Or would you still want to see a technical founder?
If I had to pick, right, if you forced me, put a gun to my face and said, pick between a business founder and a technical founder, I will pick the business founder every single time. And then I would expect that business founder to bring together the team necessary to get the technical side done. But and maybe there's some investors who are like that, but you have to be, like, really in, like, hard tech, or like for example, like, if you were a healthcare R&D company, you had to have the founder be a scientist. because the end goal is to sell the patents to a big
Mm-hmm.
firm. It's not to sell one tablet or one medicine at a time. That's why you don't want a business person in there. So if you are this hard tech R&D type of company where the end state, the win is going to be an acquisition of the patents, okay. But barring those, everything else, I will pick the business guy any day of the week, and
Interesting.
have them figure it out.
Interesting.
Now, and
Interesting.
that's why one of the best combinations is if you are a engineering bachelor's degree and then you start a business, or if you're an engineering bachelor's degree and then you do an MBA, that is like the perfect combination.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the CEO of Google, Microsoft, like all of these firms have engineering degrees from some of the best technical
Mm-hmm.
universities in the world. And then they have MBAs from Harvard and Yale and Stanford. And that's what makes them like that perfect mix of somebody who can get in and understand the technology, but at the forefront, the most recent sort of training has all been business, right?
Yeah.
And they know how to sell. They know how to sell.
I agree with you completely. I think there's a lot of people, if we're not talking life sciences, biotech, medtech, we're talking just enterprise or consumer SaaS. We've had even friends who have gone to get their MBA and then gone to like, a coding school to figure out, to meet
Yeah.
co-founders. And like that, for a non-technical, like I would say like a softer IP focused business, I think that works out just fine. At least we have somebody eyes on the prize on how do we get this to go to market and how do we start making money, especially in this economy. And Hamiz, I don't know what your firm is requiring, but again, people are requiring 0 to 1 ARR for pre-seed seed
Mm-hmm.
and 2 to 3 million
Mm-hmm.
ARR for like heavy seed A. So you
Mm-hmm.
need somebody buying your product on a regular basis to justify the kind of money you're asking for these days. They are not screwing around on
That's
that.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And what I've found, time and again, is that the a lot of companies, they spend all of their time coming up with the problem and then also coming up with the solution, when they should only be spending time coming up with the solution, and they should be spending time with their customers coming up with the problem, right? So they'll sit around the table and they'll be like, this is a big problem, without any customers on that table, right? And if it's a big problem for you but nobody's willing to pay you for it, it is not a problem that's venture
Thank you.
scalable, right? And so you need, and that's why it's so important to go to market early, is because in those early stages, if you start including customers on that table, it will
Mm-hmm.
help you actually get to the point where
Mm-hmm.
you realize, okay, we thought this was a big problem, but clearly nobody cares enough about it to pay us $1 million a year for it. So we need to change the problem set. And so all the creativity like should be applied to the solution. The creativity shouldn't be applied to the problem. The problem should be coming straight from the person's mouth who's going to write you the check, right? You shouldn't have to guess and be creative around the problem. And too many founders do that. They think about it like all the business ideas you and I, all of us come up with business ideas. It's almost always us being creative on the problem. Oh, this is a big problem. Nobody else understands this problem. No, the person who's going to write the $100,000 check, ask them what the problem is, and you just come up with the solution, right? And use and that's why go to market is so important. We met a company the other day. I absolutely love their business. Like their technology is going to go up against the big guys, but they're at a point today that essentially outside of their five team members and 4 or 5 investors, nobody's really seen the technology,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I might love it and 5 other investors might love it, but
Mm-hmm.
somebody needs to validate that I'm not paying them $1 million a year for it. So the person who's going to do that, like, I need validation from them. And so I love it, but I cannot put money into something where I am not the end customer. But if you, for example, were creating software for investment firms, or if somebody was creating software for law firms, Lindsey and I could sit there and validate the problem. Yes, I would be willing to pay $100,000 for it, right? But if I
Mm-hmm.
can't be in that position and you have no proof out in the market that you have either successfully gotten traction or you've learned why you haven't gotten traction and now you're working towards a solution, then it's not a business. It's just a group of people that came up with some technology. That's not a business.
And that's
Yeah.
called a hobby
Yeah.
loss.
Yeah.
That's a
It
hobby
is. It
loss
is.
at that point. Yeah, I
That's fair.
totally agree with you. I feel like this is one of those conversations of good is the enemy of great, or great is the enemy of good.
Yeah.
We have a lot of teams that are, we have said in this funding environment, like at the early stage, like you get your deck out there as soon as possible. You start pitching as soon as possible, whether to partners or investors or other customers, just to get feedback. And we do have clients that are dragging their feet on that because they're trying to make it better at the expense of time. And I don't think at the early stage, and this is different for later stage companies or growth stage companies, but I don't think at the earlier stage, especially when it's taking far and far between, for venture funds to deploy capital. They're being very picky, right? I think there's a balance to be struck between technical excellence on the product and error-free, and actually understanding whether or not this is what people need and can use and want to use and will pay for, right? So, at the cost of a lot of time spent that people will take to raise around these days. It's not 2021 anymore.
Yeah, and it's I think almost like a cultural thing. So if you go to a incubator, some of the best in the world, you go to an advisor who's advised venture companies, their websites, their advice all revolves around raising capital, right? Like there's some small portion of it that revolves around selling the product. Almost all of it, oh, this is how you pitch investors, this is how you raise capital, right? When from day one, like the culture has to be, it doesn't matter what you're raising money for if you can't sell the thing, right? Like if nobody's willing to buy it, either on a monthly basis or a once swoop because of your intellectual property, it is worthless, right? You're wasting your own time going down this path. And so what frustrates me a lot when I'm a mentor or something in these incubator programs is that the entire incubator program is going to be focused on how to raise the round of financing. And there's going to be one small section at the end about how you sell to customers, right? So the first pitch deck that you work on, why is it the investor pitch deck? Why is it not the customer pitch deck, right? Like, why is it not the sales deck? The sales deck should be the heart of your entire operation, right? The pitch deck, if you're selling, people don't even need the pitch deck to invest in you, right? But if you have the best pitch deck in the world, you get zero customers based off of it, right? And so I have invested in companies without a pitch deck because their financials were just that strong. And I didn't need you to explain that there was a problem and then you had the best solution because the numbers already told me that, right? Like, I was like, as long as these numbers are real, obviously there's a problem and obviously you have a good solution, right? Because somebody put their hard-earned dollars into you solving this problem for them, right? So Vanta is actually a good example. I got a newsletter about it the other day. They had like a very basic website with just a email address for support, and they do SOC audits, right? That's what they do. And they're worth billions of dollars. They've gotten into tens of millions in ARR just based off of that. And do you think any investor in the world is going to, care about it? No, you've proven that there's a problem and you have a good solution.
Yeah, we met with Vanta earlier this week.
Yeah.
It was the easiest sales pitch they've ever done. I literally was there for 5 minutes, and by the end of the call, I was asking when I can buy it.
Yeah.
Well,
when there's product market fit, you can see it from a mile away, right? Like you have to fake it.
Well, ideally, I think accelerators are getting to the benefit of accelerators, and I teach quarterly at a few and in the Bay Area, and I think they are getting better because I have seen they've been bringing in what's called like outsourced sales consultants to at least help people learn how to scale partnerships, learn how to scale sales, and we're seeing that at an earlier stage now because, and I don't know if this is what they were thinking, but I would assume it's because of the market and the venture demand for ARR at a certain level. I know we work with a lot of foreign founders that when they come here, they're flipping their companies. And the American process of how you go to market is so foreign to foreign founders. And so there are sales consultants that will help those founders learn the system because doing business in America is very different than doing the business in Luxembourg, right? Or Asia. Culturally, it's different. So there are consultants for that. There are also just standard run-of-the-mill American consulting firms like outsourced sales consultants. The same that way you have outside general counsel or outside CFO that teach these processes and procedures. Because, as VCs have been saying, they're looking more towards founder-led sales. So as a founder, you do need to know how to sell your product or your service, and you need a consultant to teach you how to do that at an earlier stage. So, kudos to the accelerators who have been doing it. I wouldn't say that I've seen it since like as early as before, the boom in 2021, but I am seeing more frequently those being brought in here, especially in light of the requirements by VCs these days.
I think it's healthy. I think overall it's healthy, and I bet you if there was a accelerator or that only focused on like driving sales, they would have far fewer failures, far more successes. Yeah, of course, maybe you wouldn't have those moonshot type of successes, right? Where you have these companies that were worth $100,000 and worth $1 billion 2 years later. But you would have more sustainable, more consistent results out of these accelerators. If you looked at their mentors in residence, like it wasn't like 5 VCs, it was like 5 sales executives that were hardened in the business that were coming in and teaching these companies how to sell. Because I'll tell you, like when a founder comes in and they have sales behind them, the level of confidence in that discussion or the power dynamic is like totally different. Like I am honored to be speaking to this person, right? Instead of the other way around. And that's just a different feeling. But the truth is that it is far more fun and far easier to build product than it is to get sales. Right. And that's why it's way more fun because you have the creativity and the problem solving. It's like way more fun to be in that phase, and founders want to stay in that phase, right? And you need to kind of jumpstart them. I have these conversations like all the time, and I'm just like, guys, like, listen, I know you're passionate about this, but I won't be able to help you. Nobody in the world will be able to help you if you don't get out of your shell and go sell this thing, and learn from that process.
For what that's worth, that's very similar in the legal industry as well. You can have the smartest lawyer in the world, but if no one hires him, he's also the brokest lawyer in the world. And there's a nice balance, especially in corporate. Corporate tends to attract a lot of real nerdy folks like me. And so if you can sell, if you can present competently, if you can convey knowledge without it sounding stuffy in legal, and I think this goes the same with tech and engineering, it's just a better business proposition all around.
Yeah, so that's right. So tell me, Lindsey, I'm curious, like from your perspective, do you feel that venture capital has permanently changed? Venture financing has permanently changed? Or do you feel this is just a 2-year cycle? It's like every other cycle. We're going to go back to how things were.
I think in the ideal market, the pendulum swings both back and forth, right? And ideally, when the negotiating power of the parties is equal, that's the healthiest venture market. Right now in 2021, we saw the pendulum swing very startup side, where you could demand anything you want. You could have a napkin and a pencil and write down an idea and get funded. Now we're seeing the opposite of that, right? We're seeing VCs in liquidity crunches because institutions are having liquidity crunches. We're seeing delayed closings on the VC side for their own money. We're seeing multiple closings. And so they're, while they're facing some pressure, but still even then they still have more of the leverage, I would say. And so we're seeing asks at an earlier stage that would be more common at a later stage, or more aggressive asks. And that's okay. That's part of where the pendulum is swinging right now. I do think it changes with the market, right? Like, so again, ideal market, everyone's kind of equal. They're coming to the table equally. It's a balanced discussion. And I think it will come back to normal. I think part of this is a little bit of a market correction that was necessary from the heyday of 2021. We had too many companies getting funded for very little ideas beyond, a deck. And I think there was too much capital or too much spaghetti being thrown at the wall, to use that analogy. And for what? Hopefully, some of the investments did well, but there was a lot of like drinking water out of a fire hydrant feel for the startups. and for the lawyers who represented them in terms of the funding environment. And it was, growth at all costs. And now it is no longer that. And I think that's better for the industry as a whole. So while, it sucks for our clients that they're getting less money, they're being asked to do more with less, and they're waiting longer in between rounds. I think this is part of that healthy market pendulum swinging towards that middle balance. And I'm hoping that will come soon. Experts have said 2 to 3 quarters, but they said that 2 to 3 quarters ago, and here we are. But I would love if the Bay Area could get up from the 6 to 7 Series A back up to the 10 or maybe 8 next year. I'm really hoping. It's a knock on wood kind of hope, but it would be ideal. What about you guys?
Lindsey, I had a quick question actually on the Bay Area, if you don't mind. I want to understand. Do you feel like it is like officially back when you think about like investing community, the founders, or because it went through obviously that rough patch, but at the same time, right now it feels, and I've heard great things. Where do you see the Bay Area in 12 months time?
Well, I think, at 16.4 billion, we still lead the US, right? New York comes in second at 5.4, but that's 1/3. We have microclimates in LA and not to diss LA, Bay Area people, because real careful about that.
We can diss it.
Not to diss Silicon Beach or Seattle or San Diego, but Silicon Valley, San Francisco is still where it is in terms of the financing. And I think, one good thing that came out of the pandemic is all of these VCs are now location agnostic, so they don't care where you operate from. But in statistics, 80% of their dollars still goes to Bay Area companies, right? So it's there. I think right now we're in an area or in a time frame where there's less deployment of capital from those VCs, but I do think it's still coming back. In fact, I'm on my way to a venture happy hour being sponsored by Wells Fargo Bank right now. I think there are more networking events. There are more reach outs. I have had more early stage venture firms looking for leads. At the same time, while I've had clients being like, I'm going to wait this one out as I can until the market corrects itself and I get a little bit more into an advantageous category, right? Or time frame. But there are people doing deals. It's not unheard of. I just think it's just fewer and farther in between than 2021.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Hamiz, if you were both to pick one city in 12 months time, not New York, not LA, not San Francisco, what city would you guys take? It could be in the world, not even the US, as a venture and startup epicenter. We had our Austin and Miami COVID experience.
Anywhere in the world?
Anywhere in the world. What city would you invest in today? And the expectation 12 months time is going to be the next hotbed.
Okay, so we cannot. I'm not going to say that we can, but we have not in the past. I would invest somewhere in the Middle East.
Interesting.
Yeah, the Middle East, the financials of these countries are rock solid. They've actually probably never been as stable as economies as they are today. They're pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into transitioning away from their traditional industries, which is a lot of energy. And it's a government-led mandate directly all the way from the top, right? And so all the way from the absolute top of the food chain, they're deploying their country's entire wealth into transitioning away from their traditional industries. So I've obviously I grew up in Pakistan, so I've kind of seen that transition happen for a long time. But they started off, in the beginning, transitioning away by going into tourism and some of those types of, industries. But now they've really caught on to how much more exportable technology can be over, experiences. So before they, I'm particularly talking about, the UAE and some of those countries. They really focused on tourism and did a great job with it. But tourism isn't very exportable. The experiences are not very exportable. They're not a very scalable revenue generation machine. And so now they're realizing that technology, obviously, focus on AI, gaming, frontier technologies, other frontier technologies like blockchain, is a far more scalable revenue generation method than some of the things they've done before. And so some of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world are controlled by these countries, and they're deploying them as if there's no other asset class other than technology. And so I would say I actually think that within the United States, the financial markets are going to be tight for much longer than people expect. I don't think that rates are going to go back to where we used to remember them anytime soon. Like, I think most people think it's a 6-month thing, 12-month thing. I think it's much longer than that. But there's jurisdictions outside the US, and Brendon and I have talked about this, where interest rates are still close to zero and capital is still freely available. And there is no sign of any recession and nothing even close to it. And those countries are really doubling down and taking advantage of the weakness in some of the Western countries that they're seeing. And they're building their own local economies in that. So that's sort of that's my take. I wouldn't expect a very quick recovery within the United States. I don't think.
All right, Lindsey, maybe to close us out, because I have to run as well. What city would you take for 12 months' time?
So I echo the MENA region. I think we've had a number of clients who have been able to raise very significant angel funding from very wealthy families and then flip their companies to the US and raise a very big Series A, especially in things like climate tech, cybersecurity, fintech. I where I'm kind of looking at microclimates, and these are the ones that are like not the New York or the Boston or the San Francisco. I'm looking at Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm looking at Denver, Colorado, Atlanta, Georgia. These are new and not as long-standing as Austin or Seattle or San Diego, but there's a lot of seed activity happening in these areas, and I'm interested to see where in the next 10 years they're going to be. I think we've had enough time in Austin to know how that market's going to play out. We've been there, tech has been there long enough, and we know where the numbers are today. But there's quite a bit of activity in the early stage venture in these very unique pockets. And so I'm really interested. We have a counsel who is from Salt Lake City and was able to negotiate a partnership with BYU in terms of like their accelerator cohort. And we're seeing really good companies come out of them. So I'm interested to see how Salt Lake City does in the future, in addition to Denver and Atlanta. Really good seed activity so far.
Interesting. What about you, Brendon? What do you think?
So I'll take Phoenix for the CHIPS Act. I think we've underestimated how much money we invest in semiconductors and I think Phoenix is going to take it over Ohio. Like if we're going to move anywhere, we're going to go somewhere warm. And I could see like the LAs, San Diegos, and the San Franciscos find their way to Phoenix before they find their way to Ohio. Oh yeah. And then on the other coast, I'll take somewhere in maybe Northern Virginia for the defense sector. I think there's a big play somewhere in the like DC metro area. Okay.
Interesting. Well, this was a very, very interesting conversation. We had multiple topics that we obviously couldn't get through because we just got really deep into the first one. That just shows you how much, at least, I was enjoying the conversation.
Love it.
So thank you very much, Lindsey, Brendon, as always.
Thanks for having me.
Would love to have you back on again whenever you have time. You let us know. We'd love to have you back on.
Absolutely.
But
yeah, and if you guys are going to be here at TechCrunch Disrupt, come see me. I'm speaking on the last 2 days, so would love to see you guys in person. I have a 50% discount code if anyone wants it. It's very nice to meet you. I've been told to freely pass out this code, so it does lower the price quite a bit. But it would be lovely to meet everybody in person.
Perfect. So good to see you, Lindsey. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.